They say truth arrives like a whisper. But the day I found that contract, it thundered through the silence of my home. I thought grief had already taken everything from me, until I realized betrayal had been waiting, patient and unseen, in my husband's handwriting. This isn't just a story about loss. It's about what happens when silence starts speaking and a widow decides to listen. My name is Margaret Hale, and what you're about to hear are the echoes of a life divided between love, loss, and truth. If my story touched you, stay close. Subscribe and walk with me through every chapter. I held the paper between my fingers, and it felt heavier than paper should. The kind of weight that doesn't come from ink or fibers, but from the truth it hides. The afternoon light slanted across my desk, soft and forgiving, as if unaware that it was illuminating a betrayal. I stared at the blue stamp pressed in the corner, faintly smudged but distinct enough for me to know. I'd seen hundreds of those stamps before, during the years I helped Robert review his company's files. This one, however, was wrong. The font was slightly sharper. The seal looked newer, colder. And the name beneath the signature, though identical at first glance, bore a subtle hesitation in the curve of the R. My husband's name, imitated by a steady but foreign hand. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. My thumb traced the indentation left by the stapler, feeling the groove as though it were a wound. Then I laid the contract flat on the desk and listened, really listened, to the silence of my house. The ticking clock in the hallway, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the floorboard beneath my chair. Every sound seemed to underline one thought. This wasn't Robert's doing. There's a moment, after death takes someone, when their absence becomes its own kind of presence. You start to believe they're still managing things somehow, that their handwriting in old documents still carries authority, that their logic still protects you from confusion. I lived in that illusion for months. Robert's files, his notebooks, the ledgers, all of them were kept exactly as he left them because I couldn't bear to disturb the order he built. Until that day. I'd been sorting through invoices to finalize the closure of one of his old projects, a routine task I'd delayed again and again. The contract was supposed to be just another piece of paper in a folder labeled Partnership Agreements. But when I opened it, the world shifted slightly. Like the floor had tilted under my feet, almost imperceptibly, but enough to make everything else slide out of place. The signature looked so perfect at first, familiar, loving even. The same confident slant I'd seen on birthday cards and bank checks. Yet something about it made my pulse tighten. Maybe it was the ink, a deeper shade than the pens Robert used. Maybe it was the date, just 3 weeks before his accident. Or maybe it was the line below, where another name appeared, the name of his business partner. Robert had trusted him for over 20 years. They'd started their company with a single desk, 2 folding chairs, and an ideal. That hard work and honesty could build something solid in a world that rarely rewards either. I used to make them coffee during those late nights, listening to their laughter echo down the hall. They were brothers in everything but blood. So when I saw that partner's name printed beside the forged signature, my heart didn't just ache, it resisted. It wanted to find another explanation, anything but deceit. Because if I was right, it meant the betrayal had started long before Robert was gone. I picked up the phone. My first impulse was to call Daniel, my son, practical to the bone. But I didn't. He'd tell me I was overthinking, that grief twists perception, that I needed rest. So instead, I sat there and looked at that contract until the afternoon light dimmed into gray. There's something sacred about the moment before you admit the truth to yourself. It's a quiet space where your heart still tries to protect you from what your mind already knows. I lingered there as long as I could. But then I noticed the serial code printed in the corner, an internal reference number. Robert always personalized those with his initials. This one ended with 3 letters that didn't belong to him, 3 letters that matched the partner's initials instead. That was when I whispered, almost without realizing it, "This isn't ours." The sound of my own voice startled me. It echoed against the walls of Robert's study, the same walls that had once been filled with the rhythm of his pen, the steady rustle of contracts being reviewed, the occasional sigh when numbers didn't add up. Now there was only my breathing, and the faint rustle of the paper between my trembling fingers. I should have stopped there. I could have folded that contract back into the folder, sealed the cabinet, and convinced myself it was nothing. But grief has a strange way of sharpening intuition. It teaches you to read silences, to sense distortions in familiar things. That day, I didn't need evidence. I felt it, like the moment before a storm, when the air itself grows thick with certainty. Still, I needed proof. Not emotion, not suspicion. Proof. So I turned the page, scanning the clauses line by line. My eyes caught on one phrase: consultative fees payable upon project closure. That clause never existed in the original agreement. I remembered typing it myself, years ago, with Robert dictating beside me. He'd insisted every partnership be transparent, every clause justified. This one wasn't. The ink of that false clause bled slightly through the page, like it wanted to confess. I closed the folder gently and placed it beside Robert's framed photograph. His smile, frozen in that picture, looked different now. Not colder, not kinder, just quieter, as if he already knew what I would find. I pressed my fingertips to the frame. "Did you know?" I asked. My voice barely left my throat. And that's when the real question surfaced, the one that still haunts me. If I was right, who else knew? Before that afternoon, my days had found a gentle rhythm again. The kind of rhythm that comes when grief settles, not gone, but tamed. Mornings with tea by the window, afternoons sorting through Robert's notes, evenings wrapped in a silence that had become strangely companionable. People tell you time heals, but it doesn't. Time only teaches you how to carry what can't be healed. I had learned to carry Robert's absence the way one carries a scar, visible only when the light hits it just right. His office remained untouched for months, not out of denial, but reverence. The scent of cedar polish still lingered on the shelves. His fountain pen, the one with the gold nib slightly bent from years of use, rested beside a closed ledger. Sometimes I'd stand there, fingertips brushing the spine of his notebooks, half expecting him to walk in, humming under his breath, sleeves rolled to his elbows, ready to fix another problem with calm precision. He was that kind of man. Quiet power, unshakable ethics. Robert didn't just build a business, he built trust. And his partner, well, we all trusted him too. They met long before I came into Robert's life. Two young men with matching ambitions, bound by the kind of loyalty forged in late nights and lean beginnings. I remember Robert describing him as the brother I chose. When they started the company, our dining table doubled as their conference room. Contracts were signed beside coffee cups, and laughter drowned out the fatigue of endless numbers. I used to listen from the kitchen, catching fragments of their debates: ethics versus efficiency, loyalty versus profit. Robert always took the longer route, the honest one. And somehow, his partner always convinced him that small shortcuts were harmless. "Every business has its secrets," he'd said once, smiling in that way men do when they think they're wiser than caution. Robert laughed it off. He trusted too deeply to imagine deceit hiding behind familiarity. Looking back, I wonder if I noticed the cracks too late, or if I chose not to. After Robert's funeral, his partner became a presence I appreciated at first. He handled the practicalities I couldn't face: insurance, transfers, board paperwork. He spoke gently, with the respectful gravity of someone who had lost a friend. He told me the company was stable, that Robert's legacy was safe. I wanted to believe him. Daniel didn't. My son had always been sharper, more skeptical than his father. "People change when money's involved, Mother," he said one night, "even the ones who look honest." I told him not to let suspicion harden his heart. He shrugged. You were always the idealist between you and Dad. Maybe he was right. I noticed small things. Files missing from the shelves, duplicates of receipts that didn't quite match, a supplier name I didn't recognize. But every time I mentioned it, the explanations came so quickly, so smoothly, that I felt foolish for asking. Old system, his partner would say. Robert approved those. You know how meticulous he was. And I did know, which is why I stopped asking. Still, the unease lingered like a draft under a closed door. Claire, ever the peacemaker, told me I was imagining patterns in grief. Let it rest, Mother, she said. You've already carried too much. Emma, my youngest, said something different. If something feels wrong, maybe it is, she whispered. Her words stayed with me longer than she knew. There's a certain tone grief takes when it mingles with doubt. It's quieter than anger, colder than fear. It makes you second-guess your memories, replaying moments that once felt innocent. I remembered a conversation, a few weeks before the accident. Robert had mentioned small discrepancies in the ledgers, but he'd smiled when he said it. Just rounding errors, he told me, tapping his pen against the margin. Our auditor's handling it. Then he'd change the subject, asking what I wanted for dinner. I think now he knew more than he let on. The mind does strange things when it starts connecting dots. Each thought leads to another until you're standing in front of something you can't unsee. That night, I sat at Robert's desk, running my fingers over the ridges of the wood, remembering the way he used to say that numbers were just another form of truth. They tell the story you can't lie about, he'd said once. So I decided to read that story for myself. I began small, invoices, archived letters, banknotes. The handwriting alone told me which ones Robert had touched and which ones he hadn't. The difference was subtle, but it was there. The way his H curved downward, never upward, the precision in his decimals, his belief that clarity was a moral duty. Then, between two neatly clipped pages, I found a receipt. Plain, unremarkable, except for the blue stamp. It wasn't one of ours. The emblem looked familiar yet wrong, like a face I should have recognized but couldn't. The name underneath was a supplier we had never used. And the date matched the week Robert had spent in the hospital for his last checkup. I turned the paper over, feeling the thickness of the stock, the indentation of the stamp. Something about it didn't belong here. And in that instant, standing in the quiet of his study, I realized I was holding a thread. A single thread that, if pulled, might unravel everything I thought I understood about loyalty, partnership, and truth. I closed the drawer softly, slid the receipt into my pocket, and stood there for a moment, listening to the house breathe. Outside, the evening light had thinned to gold. The air smelled faintly of rain. And though no one else was in the room, I whispered, almost like a prayer, "Robert, what were you protecting me from?" It began with a drawer that refused to open smoothly. A small resistance, the kind that makes you wonder if something inside doesn't want to be found. The drawer in Robert's desk had always stuck a little, swollen by years of humidity. But that morning, as I tugged gently and felt the sudden give of old wood, a fine dust drifted upward, shimmering in the light. The smell of paper, ink, and time filled the air, the scent of a life catalogued in contracts and correspondence. Inside were folders, some labeled in Robert's careful handwriting, others blank. One of them, a brown file marked only by a faint pencil line, felt out of place. Too new, too deliberate. I lifted it out, and a single sheet slid free, gliding onto the carpet like a secret trying to escape. It was another contract. At first I thought it was a duplicate, but the layout was different, cleaner, more recent. The font, the margins, the sequence of clauses, all subtly altered. I turned it over, scanning the familiar heading. Hale and Whitmore Construction Associates. That was Robert's company. And beneath it, in smaller print, the words that froze me in place. Consultive Honorarium Agreement. Robert never used the term honorarium. It sounded pretentious to him. He preferred service fee. He'd said once, "Language defines integrity. The wrong word changes the meaning of the act." And there it was, the wrong word, written in black and white, sitting in his desk. I sank into the chair, the old leather sighing beneath my weight. My heart beat in steady, careful pulses, as though afraid to alert the air around me. The light outside flickered through the curtains, restless and fractured. Clause after clause read like a mirror image of Robert's original contract, except for one. Additional consulting compensation to be issued to Partner B for continued project oversight, effective upon primary partner's incapacitation. The words primary partner's incapacitation caught the light as I tilted the page. Robert's illness, his surgery, his brief absence from the office. And beneath that clause, 2 signatures, Robert's and the partner's. Except Robert's wasn't Robert's. It mimicked him perfectly, yet something in the rhythm of the pen betrayed hesitation. I knew the way he signed his name, always a firm start, no second attempt, a line drawn with conviction. This signature, it wavered. It wanted to be convincing. It wanted too much. I felt an ache rising in my chest, not from disbelief, but from recognition. The way grief recognizes its twin when betrayal walks in wearing a familiar face. I folded the paper slowly, carefully, as if folding a wound shut. My fingers trembled, but my mind was clear, unnervingly so. The world outside continued, indifferent. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower droned. A bird knocked against the window. Ordinary sounds, unaware that an entire history had just shifted. I reached for Robert's old notebook, the one he used for final revisions. It lay open to a blank page, his pen resting diagonally across the spine. I traced the pen's edge and whispered, "You would have seen this, wouldn't you?" Because Robert missed nothing. He noticed patterns before anyone else did. He could read dishonesty not in words, but in the way people avoided silence. My silence now felt like a shield. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell the children. Not yet. Instead, I placed both contracts side by side on the desk. The real one, faintly yellowed, the ink soft and aged. The false one, crisp, immaculate, pretending to belong. The difference was moral, not physical. One carried trust, the other carried calculation. I couldn't prove anything yet, but I didn't need to. The truth was already whispering through the details, the phrasing, the alignment, the ink, even the way the paper absorbed light. Robert's documents always had texture. This one reflected instead, like a mask. I slipped the second contract back into the folder, marked it with a red ribbon, and returned it to the drawer. Then I locked the office door for the first time since his passing. I thought that would bring peace. It didn't. It only made the house too quiet. Later that evening, I sat by the window, the folder on my lap. The sky was turning violet, the kind of color that blurs the line between day and night. I could see the reflection of my own face in the glass. Calm, composed, unreadable. The mask of every woman who has just discovered a truth she can't yet speak aloud. And then the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence, gentle but deliberate. I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. "Margaret," a man's tone, familiar, rehearsed. "It's been too long. I was just checking in. How have you been holding up?" The voice belonged to Robert's partner, and though his words were wrapped in kindness, there was a pause too long, a smile I could hear but not trust. I looked down at the folder still resting on my lap. The weight of it seemed to press against my heart. "I'm managing," I said. "One day at a time." He laughed softly. "Good, that's good. We should meet soon, talk about finalizing the pending matters." My hand tightened around the folder. "Yes," I replied. "We should." When the line went dead, I sat there for a long moment, listening to the echo of his voice fading into the room. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, and somewhere deep inside me, the certainty settled. This was no coincidence. If I was right, that phone call wasn't a courtesy. It was a warning. For days after that call, I lived as if nothing had changed. At least, that's what I wanted everyone to believe. Grief teaches you the art of performance, smiling when your heart is still broken, speaking softly when every instinct wants to scream. But betrayal teaches you a different silence, one that listens instead of pleads. I began to listen. Each morning, after the children left and the house settled into its quiet rhythm, I returned to Robert's office. The dust had thickened over time, soft as ash, clinging to the edge of his desk lamp. I wiped it clean, set my teacup down, and opened the files one by one. Robert had always said that truth hides in repetition, in the small details others overlook. So I read everything twice, sometimes 3 times. Contracts, ledgers, receipts, emails printed and tucked away in manila folders. The paper whispered its own kind of confession. Patterns emerged. A series of invoices paid to a consulting firm I'd never heard of. Identical amounts, always just below the threshold that required board approval. The same date every month, and each one bore that same foreign stamp. The more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't sloppiness, it was choreography. I started a ledger of my own, a plain notebook, no titles, no labels. I listed dates, names, transaction codes. Numbers became my allies, quiet soldiers lining up behind me. For the first time since Robert's passing, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt purpose. At night, when the house was asleep, I sat at the dining table under a single lamp, tracing the flow of money like a trail of light through the dark. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and outside, a branch tapped against the window. Every sound felt sharper, as though the world itself were holding its breath. One evening, I called Reverend Whitmore, not to confess, but to steady myself. "Reverend," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "does the truth always need to be shouted to be heard?" He paused, then answered, "No, Margaret. Sometimes the quiet truths are the ones that survive the noise." That was enough. The next morning, I visited Dr. Carter under the pretext of reviewing Robert's last medical records. We spoke of small things: blood work, medication, recovery. Then, almost casually, I asked if he remembered when Robert had been called back to the office during his treatment. He frowned, searching his memory. "Just once," he said. He looked troubled that day. I assumed it was business. Business. That word had begun to taste bitter. Back home, I opened Robert's laptop, the old one, still protected by the password only I knew. It took 3 tries for my fingers to find the rhythm of his code, the date we'd met, the year our first child was born. The screen flickered to life, and his desktop appeared, untouched since the last time he'd used it. Among the documents, one folder stood out, hidden in plain sight, named simply Archive. Inside, dozens of spreadsheets, and in one of them, highlighted cells in green. I clicked through them, heart steady but alert. Each green line corresponded to a payment, identical in format to the invoices I'd found. But then something caught my eye. A final entry, dated just 2 months after his death. I froze. Robert was gone. His accounts were frozen. His signature no longer valid. And yet, a payment had gone out. The amount was smaller than the others, but the reference code matched the phantom company. I copied it down, the digits burning themselves into my memory. I leaned back, staring at the glow of the screen, feeling the pulse in my wrist quicken. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. Who had access? Who still had authorization? I knew the answer before the question fully formed. His partner. The realization didn't come with anger. Not yet. Only an ache of inevitability, like watching a storm form at the horizon and knowing it's heading your way. For days after, I moved carefully. I spoke to no one. When Daniel called, I told him I was tired, but fine. When Claire dropped by with groceries, I thanked her, smiling more than I felt. I even attended Sunday service, sitting in the same pew Robert used to favor, listening to the sermon about patience and discernment. But beneath the calm, I was mapping everything. Every document I touched, every date I verified, every inconsistency that whispered beneath the surface. By the end of that week, I had built a quiet fortress of evidence. Each page a brick, each number a nail. My grief had transformed into structure, solid, deliberate, protective. Still, I needed confirmation. Something external, something undeniable. That came unexpectedly. On the following Tuesday, as I poured tea and reached for the morning mail, an envelope slid free from the stack, thin, official, marked with the logo of Robert's old bank. I almost tossed it aside, assuming it was a routine statement. But the weight of the paper made me pause. I unfolded it, expecting balance summaries. Instead, there it was, a notification of electronic transfer approval, issued to an entity registered under Hale and Whitmore Consulting, Subdivision B, the same name printed on the fake invoices. And the date, only a week ago. I set the paper down, my hands trembling just enough to make the teacup clink against its saucer. The bank had processed a payment from an account that should have been sealed. Robert's account. I looked toward his study. The door closed, the air beyond it heavy with silence. Then I whispered, barely audible, "It's still happening." The night I found the bank notice, I slept very little. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers moving, steady, mechanical, indifferent. They formed patterns, almost elegant in their precision, as if the betrayal itself took pride in its design. By morning, I knew I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. The first to arrive was Daniel. He noticed immediately that something in me had shifted. "You've been quiet," he said, setting his briefcase on the counter. "More than usual." "I've been reading," I answered. "Your father's papers." He sighed, that controlled, managerial sigh of his that always sounded like a verdict. "Mother, I told you to let those go. It's not healthy to keep reopening the past." "It's not the past," I said softly. "It's unfinished business." He turned to face me then, his expression tightening. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed the folder on the kitchen table. The morning light caught its edges, turning the paper gold. I watched his face as he opened it, the shift from curiosity to disbelief to irritation. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "Your father's desk." He scanned the documents quickly, tapping a finger against the false signature. "You're not suggesting." "I'm not suggesting," I said. "I'm showing." He stared at me, jaw tense. "Mother, this is serious. You can't make accusations like this without evidence." "I have evidence," I said. "Enough to know what was done." Daniel exhaled sharply, pacing. "Then we take it to court, publicly. We'll make him answer for this." His voice was rising, but mine stayed calm. "No, Daniel, we won't." He stopped mid-step, his frustration palpable. "You can't mean that. He defrauded the company. He betrayed Father's trust." "Yes," I said. "And he'll face the truth, but not through noise." That was when Claire appeared at the doorway, drawn by the sound of our argument. "What's going on?" she asked gently. "Your mother believes there's been fraud," Daniel said, still pacing. Claire looked at me, searching my eyes for confirmation. I nodded. Her hand flew to her mouth. Dear God! For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, 12 beats that felt like judgment. Then Claire broke the silence. "So what happens now?" Daniel's response was immediate. "We expose him. We file a report, contact the board, freeze his accounts." "No." My voice was quiet but final. They both turned to me. "Justice isn't always loud," I said, "and it isn't revenge. If we act out of anger, we become what he counted on. people too emotional to be taken seriously. Daniel's brow furrowed. You sound just like Father. I hope so, I replied. He believed that integrity doesn't need an audience. Claire reached for my hand, her touch soft but trembling. But you can't do this alone, Mother. I'm not alone, I said. I have the truth. That's all I need right now. Later that evening, Emma came by. She'd heard fragments of the argument, though no one had told her everything. She found me in Robert's study, sitting beside the old lamp, the light warm and forgiving. Is it true? She asked. Yes, I said. But truth isn't the hardest part. Deciding what to do with it is. She sat beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. Peace without truth is just silence that hurts. Her words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through everything I thought I'd settled. I turned to her. Your father once said something similar. That peace built on lies always collapses. I didn't want to believe it then. Emma looked at me with eyes far wiser than her years. So, what will you do? I'll finish what he started, I said. That night, after everyone had left, I returned to the desk and reopened the folder. The evidence lay there, patient, waiting. The forged signature, the false invoices, the bank transfer. And now, something new. A time-stamped seal from the supplier, the same one connected to the phantom payments. The mark was clear, digital, unalterable. It tied everything together. I ran my fingers across the date, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. The timestamp matched the week Robert was hospitalized. While I sat at his bedside, reading him the Psalms and praying he would recover, someone had been signing his name in another room. I let the page fall back into place, the edges fluttering softly like wings. For a long time, I just sat there, breathing in the dim air, surrounded by the scent of paper and cedar and grief. There was no anger left, only precision. I wasn't a widow anymore, not in that moment. I was an investigator, a keeper of my husband's truth. And though the night pressed close around me, I felt something new in the darkness, a quiet resolve, steady and sharp. This wouldn't end with shouting, it would end with proof. There's a kind of calm that comes when you stop asking why and start preparing how. After weeks of silence and sleepless nights, my grief had calcified into something colder, something useful. I cleared the desk, dusted the lamp, and began assembling the truth. Page by page, I laid everything out. Contracts, invoices, bank notices, correspondence. I used thin ribbons to separate each category, labeling them in the smallest handwriting I could manage. The papers formed a map, a story told in numbers, signatures, and omissions. I wasn't building an accusation. I was building a fortress. The pattern revealed itself like architecture. Every fraudulent transfer had its twin, a shadow payment camouflaged beneath legitimate expenses. I traced them one by one, marking them in red ink. The rhythm of the work became almost meditative, pen sliding, paper shifting, truth emerging from chaos. I thought of Robert as I worked. He used to say, "Integrity is like a foundation, invisible when strong, catastrophic when cracked." He was right, and now I was rebuilding the foundation he left behind. By the third night, I had created a complete timeline, a visual ledger, dates, signatures, initials, each line connected by arrows drawn with an engineer's precision. I found myself whispering aloud as I worked. You hid the money here, but you forgot the timestamp. You forged the signature, but not the file path. The office became a sanctuary of quiet revenge, not vengeful in spirit, but precise, exacting, moral. I began printing emails, some from Robert's account, others from the company's archives. Among them was one exchange that chilled me, a brief, casual message from his partner sent 3 days before the fake contract's date. It read, "If anything changes with Robert's condition, we should finalize our arrangements immediately." Arrangements. The word bled with implication. I printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it on top of the file. When Claire came by to bring me soup, she saw the papers spread across the table. "Mother, this looks like a crime scene," she said, half joking, half worried. "It is," I replied without looking up. "Shouldn't you rest?" "Rest comes after truth," I said. She didn't argue. She just stood there, quietly watching as I highlighted another figure. I think she understood that this wasn't obsession, it was reclamation. Each proof felt like reclaiming a piece of Robert's integrity. Each number, each clause, a nail sealing the coffin of deceit. By the end of the week, I had assembled what I came to call the Ledger of Light. Not out loud, but in my mind. It was an entire dossier of evidence so detailed that no argument could distort it. But it wasn't just paper. It was purpose. And in that purpose, I rediscovered a kind of peace, not gentle, but clear. I printed the final summary, a single sheet with the words "Summary of Irregular Transactions" for review. I slipped it into a folder with the others and sealed it with a clip. The following morning, I called Samuel Whitmore. His voice, warm and steady as ever, answered on the second ring. "Margaret, my dear, it's been a while. How are you?" "I need a favor," I said, "one that requires discretion." He didn't hesitate. "Of course. What's happened?" "I've found something that doesn't belong in Robert's records. I need a legal eye before I move forward." His tone shifted immediately, serious but calm. "Bring it to me, quietly. No one else needs to know yet." Later that afternoon, I walked to his office. The air outside was damp, heavy with the promise of rain. I carried the folder close to my chest, the way one carries fragile truth. Steady, deliberate, with reverence. When I arrived, Samuel greeted me at the door. He looked older, gentler than I remembered, but his eyes still held that patient intelligence that always made people tell him the truth. He led me to his study, offered tea, then gestured toward the table. I placed the folder in front of him without a word. He studied my face before opening it. "Do you want me to read it now?" "Yes," I said. As he turned each page, the only sounds were the soft rustle of paper and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Every so often, he'd pause, glance at me, and then continue. When he reached the final sheet, the email, he set his glasses down and exhaled. "Margaret," he said quietly, "this is extensive." "I needed to be thorough," I replied. He nodded, then leaned back in his chair. "You've done more than thorough. This is airtight. If we take this forward, there will be consequences. Financial, legal, reputational." "I know. And you're ready for that?" "I'm ready for truth." He regarded me for a moment, perhaps seeing in me what Robert once saw, resolve hidden beneath gentleness. Then he smiled faintly. "Then truth it shall be." He gathered the papers, placed them back in the folder, and secured it with a small brass clip. "I'll review everything tonight. Quietly. You've done well." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Leaving his office, I stepped into the rain. It wasn't heavy, more of a mist that clung to the air. The streets shimmered with reflected light, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest ease slightly. I had done it. I had transformed grief into structure, pain into precision, silence into proof. At home, I dried my hands, placed the umbrella by the door, and looked at the empty chair across the room, Robert's chair. "I did it the way you would have," I whispered. Then, in a single motion, I locked the front door, drew the curtains, and stood in the stillness of my living room. Tomorrow, the truth would move forward. Tonight, silence would be my shield. The following week arrived with an uncanny stillness, the kind that lingers before a storm. Samuel called early that morning. His voice was steady, deliberate. "It's time," he said. "I've arranged the meeting. You'll have the floor." For a long moment, I simply stared at the phone in my hand. The words sounded both foreign and inevitable. You'll have the floor. I dressed carefully, not in morning black, not in softness. A gray suit, understated but precise. Robert's watch on my wrist, still ticking. It had lost a minute over the years, but it felt like a piece of time I could command. When I arrived at the office building, everything smelled faintly of varnish and old ambition. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, unaware of the quiet war about to unfold behind the glass doors. Inside the conference room, light poured in through tall windows, sterile, unforgiving. The partner was already seated, his posture impeccable, his expression rehearsed. He rose when he saw me, extending a hand. "Margaret," he said, voice warm but wary. "It's been too long." "Indeed," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. His palm was dry, too calculated. The handshake of a man who measures pressure, not sincerity. Samuel motioned for us to sit. On the table lay a single folder. Mine. He placed his glasses on, then looked at the partner. "Thank you both for coming. I believe it's best if Margaret begins." The man smiled thinly. "Of course. I'm curious to hear what this is about." I opened the folder slowly, sliding a document forward. "This," I said, "is a copy of a contract I found in Robert's files. Your signature is here. So is his, or rather, someone's attempt at his." He frowned, glancing down. "I don't know what you think you found, but—" I interrupted softly. "I haven't told you what I think. Only what I can prove." His eyes flickered, a small movement, but it told me enough. I continued, placing the next sheet in front of him. "These are the invoices tied to that same agreement. Each corresponds to payments to a company registered under your name, disguised as consulting fees." His composure tightened. "This is absurd." Samuel leaned forward. "We verified the account. It's active. The transfers match the documentation." The partner turned toward me, attempting a smile. "Margaret, you're grieving. I understand how pain can distort perception." My voice cut through his words, not raised, but sharp enough to leave no space between syllables. "Don't mistake grief for blindness." The room fell silent. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. I reached for the next page, the email. I slid it toward him but didn't speak. He read it. His face didn't move, but his hand trembled, the smallest betrayal of control. "That message," I said quietly, "was sent 3 days before you forged Robert's signature. You anticipated his illness. You planned to act before he returned." His voice broke slightly. "You can't prove intent." "I don't need to," I replied. "The documents prove conduct." He looked at Samuel, searching for rescue, but Samuel remained still, his expression unreadable. Finally, the partner exhaled and leaned back. "What do you want, Margaret?" I folded my hands on the table. "Restitution. Quietly. You return every cent to the estate. No noise, no court, just truth restored." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And if I refuse?" I met his gaze evenly. "Then the board, the auditors, and the authorities will have this entire dossier before the end of the week. I'll lose my peace, perhaps, but you'll lose your name." For a moment he said nothing. Then his eyes dropped to the papers again. I could almost hear the sound of the walls closing in, the echo of consequence catching up. He reached for the pen lying beside Samuel's notebook, turned it slowly in his hand, and stared at the line marked "Acknowledgement of Restitution." His jaw flexed. "You've thought of everything." "No," I said softly. "Robert did. I just followed his principles." He hesitated for a fraction longer, then pressed the pen to the paper. The sound of ink against texture filled the room, sharp, final. When he finished, he set the pen down, not looking at me. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "You win." I shook my head. No one wins when trust is broken, but truth stands. Samuel reached for the document, checked the signature, and nodded solemnly. It's done. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. My hands were steady, my pulse even. As I rose, the partner finally looked at me. You could have destroyed me publicly, he said. Why didn't you? I paused at the door. Because integrity doesn't need witnesses. The light outside had softened now, less sterile, almost merciful. I walked out of the building and into the open air. For the first time in months, I inhaled deeply. The sky smelled of iron and rain, the scent of storms that have already passed. The next morning, the city felt lighter. It wasn't that the world had changed. The streets still hummed with traffic, the sky still carried its gray. But something inside me had shifted. The silence that once felt heavy now felt earned. Samuel called around noon. It's settled, he said. The restitution will be processed today. And there's something else. His pause was deliberate. He left a letter. For you. For a moment I couldn't speak. The idea of words from him, the man who had buried deceit beneath my husband's name, felt almost offensive. And yet, curiosity, that small pulse of unfinished humanity, pushed through my composure. When Samuel handed me the envelope later that afternoon, I noticed how carefully it was sealed, as if even guilt demanded ceremony. My name, written in cursive, looked hesitant, uneven. I sat by the window, the light softening into gold, and opened it. The letter was brief. Margaret, I can't undo what I did. I justified it as survival, but it was greed. Robert trusted me when I no longer trusted myself. You could have ruined me. You didn't. I'll make the restitution in full. I don't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. J. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the same drawer where Robert's fountain pen still rested. The ink of his letter looked almost identical to Robert's, but unlike the forged contract, this one felt human, fallible, raw. Outside, a faint rain began to fall, tapping against the window pane in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, feeling the kind of quiet that comes when justice doesn't need to shout. Later that evening, Emma visited. She found me in the kitchen, pouring tea. It's done, I told her. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes soft with relief. Does it feel better? No, I said. It feels right. She smiled faintly. That's better than peace. We stood in silence for a while, watching the rain streak down the glass. Daniel called that night. His tone was cautious, measured. I heard what happened, he said. You managed it better than I would have. You would have fought louder, I replied. He chuckled, and lost faster. For the first time in months, his laughter didn't sting. It sounded like the world moving forward. After everyone went to bed, I sat alone in Robert's study. The folder, once a symbol of burden, now lay closed, light, almost weightless. I traced its edge and whispered, It's done, my love. The clock ticked softly in the corner, steady as breath. And in that rhythm, I realized something profound. Justice had never been about punishment. It was about restoration, about returning what had been twisted back to its rightful shape. I glanced at the photograph on the desk, Robert smiling faintly, eyes crinkled with warmth. For the first time, I smiled back without pain. Somewhere deep within, I could feel his presence settle, not as a wound but as a foundation, solid, quiet, whole again. The rain stopped before midnight. I opened the window, letting in the scent of wet earth and renewal. The world outside glistened, streets reflecting faint lamplight like veins of silver. And in that stillness, I whispered one final truth, the one that had guided me through the storm. The truth doesn't need to shout. It simply stands. Morning light returned the way forgiveness sometimes does, slowly, without fanfare, touching the room before touching the heart. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the air crisp, almost new. The window pane glowed with quiet light, and for a moment I simply stood there, watching dust drift in the sunbeam. It looked like time itself, small, suspended, gentle. On Robert's desk lay the last of it all, the real contract, its edges worn, the ink faded to a soft gray. Beside it, the fountain pen, the same one that had signed every agreement in his life, and the one I refused to let anyone else touch. I took it in my hand, felt its familiar weight, and for the first time, it didn't feel like loss. It felt like continuity. Then I reached into the drawer and brought out a small wooden box, the kind Robert used to keep coins from his travels, pieces of other lives, other days. Inside, I placed the company seal, the true one, the one that bore his initials. The same seal that weeks ago had told me something was wrong. Now, it rested quietly in the box, no longer an accusation, but a memory reclaimed. I closed the lid gently, feeling the soft click of wood meeting wood. It was the sound of closure, not the abrupt kind that silences, but the patient kind that understands. Outside, the light grew warmer. I opened the curtains fully. The house breathed again, the scent of paper and cedar mingling with morning air. On the wall, Robert's photograph caught the light. His smile, familiar, calm, seemed to meet mine. "I didn't shout," I whispered. "I proved." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the space around me, steady and true. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, faint, measured, reminding me of time's gentle insistence that life goes on. I let it. Emma had left a note on the table before going out. "Tea for you and peace for your morning." I smiled, pouring myself a cup, watching the steam rise in soft spirals. The world had texture again, the clink of porcelain, the smell of rain-soaked earth, the hum of life resuming its rhythm. When I stepped outside, the sky was pale blue, thin clouds drifting like sighs. The garden looked different now, the same, but healed somehow. I walked to the edge of the path where the first hydrangeas were blooming, their petals carrying the color of early forgiveness, soft blue, almost gray. I reached out, brushed one lightly with my fingertips, and felt the coolness of dew on my skin. There was a peace in knowing that justice didn't demand spectacle. That truth, when carried with dignity, restores more than it destroys. Robert had once said, "We build our lives like houses, Margaret. Some rooms hold light, others hold memory. But the foundation, that's always made of truth." I finally understood. As I turned to go back inside, I glanced once more at the study window. The light falling across the desk seemed to linger there, patient and bright. The same light that had revealed deceit, now illuminating what remained unbroken. The truth. My truth. I closed the door softly behind me, not as farewell, but as beginning. And somewhere deep within, where faith meets quiet strength, I felt him there, not as absence, but as witness. A heartbeat, a promise, a silence that spoke louder than words.